Hey everybody, welcome back to Bridging the Gap.
New season, brother. It's a new season.
New
I
season.
love it.
I'm kind of really stoked about this. Like before it was like, oh, we're doing this thing, and I'm like, oh, we get to do it again. So, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. My name's Nash.
Johnny Angel, we're here to talk to you about music and bridging that old gap, man.
Yeah. So, how you been?
I'm doing great, man.
Yeah.
It's a brand new year. Can you believe another year going by?
I know. We're back and we're in a new season already, right?
Yep. And I want to talk a little bit, some different stuff this season, if we could. We've been talking a lot about music, which we're going to continue to.
Always.
But let's talk more about the nuts and bolts of music, you know, about like the recording studio.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because things have changed since I've recorded.
Drastically, yeah.
You have a studio.
Yeah, I have a home studio, and I just invested in ramping this bad boy up. And it's weird because I had taken a little bit of a break from recording myself because I was gigging so much. And then I had an opportunity to produce some music for the Warhol, and I was like, this is probably a good time to take that up a notch. And it's interesting because every time I get better, I feel like I'm right back at square one. Because as an artist, you know, before it was like learn the songs, learn how to perform. Then as technology advanced, it's like, oh wait, I can get pretty decent sounds right here on my laptop and produce things. And it made the responsibility of the artist kind of, you took on more. Yeah. But I still do love the feel of like a traditional studio where you're just being an artist, someone's recording you. Yep. How's that for you with like doing the radio show and stuff, dealing with technology?
I even have a studio. Yeah. Can you imagine me having a studio? My studio is a little bit different. I was on radio for a lot of years, of course, here in Pittsburgh and then internet. And now the station comes out of North Carolina. Okay. And every Sunday night I'm on the air, and I sit in my little studio at the house, and I have a board just like I did on the radio station. And I dial in, and I take control of the station for 3 hours. And it's just like having everything except a program manager. Yeah. You know? And I sit there and I do my thing, and I have fun, and I can sit there in my pajamas. You know what I mean? Don't have to worry about a thing, but it's so much easier than the days when I have to go to the station. You know, you brought your records, your CDs, your thing. You sit there, you're on the board, you're putting them on, you're putting carts in and all that stuff. Yeah. Nah, so it's changed. This is new for me. It's a new thing.
Do you feel like there's a learning curve coming from the era that you have, dealing with the new ways that I have to send this file and I got to email this and I have to store this there? There's a lot. I mean, the more you learn that there's more you have to learn.
I'm an old dog. No new tricks, brother.
No new tricks, huh?
It's hard. I mean, I just figured out what a cloud is, you know what I mean? And that's new for me. You know? And my daughter's always talking to me about, look in your Dropbox. I'm like, Dropbox to me is this container they put my mail in, and I go over and I pick it up, and you know what I mean? Yeah. So, and it's basically the same thing. Yeah. But it's fictitious.
It's interesting because as an artist, I find that I do like the idea of developing my sound. Yeah. And I think it's nicer to know kind of what you want to do and experiment as compared to sometimes, like I remember going in the studio and like the clock's ticking. I'm like, I don't know if we have this song down yet. And it's like, maybe I should have done more pre-production. Yes. And then you don't even know if you're actually good at it. So then you have to develop an ear and listen to music a certain way. So
my first record when I was in the studio, I'm going back to the 60s. Yeah. We were in WRS Motion Picture Studios. There were 3 microphones. There was a microphone for the lead vocalist. There was a microphone that you recorded your background vocals, and then one mic that mic'd the whole room. Yeah. And that was it.
And you had to be on.
And if you weren't on, you did it again or you let it lie. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what I do love about a lot of old music, especially jazz. I'm like, oh, they played that right there on the spot. You know, maybe they did 50 takes, but you can hear that was in the moment, you know. And I think that's why I always go back to older music. Yeah. Because one of the things that get in the way, I think, is having too many options. When you're like limited, you have to be a little bit more creative.
You got to be on your game. Mm-hmm. And I now a lot of young people tell me about, well, I never met my band. The guy that plays keyboards is in Ohio, and the horn section is in New York.
That is a weird thing.
And I'm going, wait a minute. Well, how do you get that feel? How do you get that groove, the mojo together? You know what I mean? Yeah. When you're not with the musicians, you know. But that's where people like yourself and about our next guest know how to do this stuff. I don't understand all of it, you know, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah, guys, stay tuned. Actually, before we go to the guest, and we want to hold off,
Oh,
You have some records, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of lessons and studio and sounds.
well, I started listening to some different stuff this season, right?
Okay.
And the first thing I pulled out, does anyone out there remember the Ventures? Ventures?
I do.
Yeah, okay. It's an instrumental group, right? And the two of these guys, their guitar work is they're famous. You know what I mean? But when I first started playing drums, I remember hearing the song Wipeout, which was about the Safaris, you know, and every drummer wanted to play Wipeout, right? So I found these albums back in the day. It says, learn how to play the guitar with the Ventures and learn how to play the bass with the Ventures. And I thought they need to have one that says, learn how to play the drums with the Ventures, right? But what it did is this record plays the song that you wanted to play. And then they take your part out, your rhythm section out, and then you play to it, which was kind of cool. You know what I mean? So I have a whole collection of these, but they're very rare and they're very cool. You know what I mean? It's something different. So this is the way we learned back in the day.
It's funny that you say that because my album, I'm kind of on this like rock guitar kick, and Metallica Ride the Lightning was really instrumental in making me want to play guitar, but also understanding the harmonies because they have the dual guitar thing.
Yep.
And thinking about like, you know, a lot of this was recorded to tape back in the day. And there's just something, I'm not a purist, but I really do love analog, and I really do love that old kind of warm sound.
Amen.
And even though this is heavy metal and thrash, it still has that, you know, and this is how I learned how to play guitar, by moving the needle and listening over and over. So
it's like the Allman Brothers, right?
Yeah.
Same way with Dickie Betts and I'm playing. There we go. I'm getting.
we're going to get off track. Speaking of studio stuff, our next guest is Bob McCutcheon, who owns The Vault, an amazing studio space, and we can't wait to have him on so you guys can hear about this place.
And educate me.
Oh yeah, I'm going to get educated as well. Stay tuned, guys.
Jack in the Box.
Welcome to Jack in the Box, and today I'm going to talk about the King of Pop. Who's the King of Pop? You don't know who the King of Pop is? Well, it's Michael Jackson, of course. This is for his doll. This is for the Michael Jackson doll, and you can change outfits, but this is the doll right there. Michael in his leather, and of course Michael in his beat it. Just beat it, ha, because it's Ginchy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Bridging the Gap. We are so excited to introduce our next guest, Bob McCutcheon from The Vault. Welcome.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem.
This is new for me, man.
I know.
I've heard so much about this guy from my daughter. I got to pick his brain.
None of it's true.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't even know where to start. Tell us about the studio. Let's just start there, because I know that like you were doing some other things and then you decided to build the studio. What made you even want to go in that direction?
Yeah, it's an interesting path, at least my story. So I actually started, I played in bands, guitar player, and recorded back in high school and college, and actually built my first recording studio while I was in college. I actually ran myself through school, running my first studio. And ironically, I went to school for business because I thought maybe I'd run my own business.
Yeah.
Ended up in, a 27, 28-year career in public accounting, which was fantastic, and it taught me a lot, but I never really gave up on my music, kept every piece of gear I've ever, I look around the history here and I think, I've never sold or got rid of anything. I always kept everything I ever purchased. But I always had that desire to have a studio along the way. And it's funny because I actually saw Dave Grohl in the documentary Sound City.
Love it.
Fantastic documentary if you haven't seen it. I was coming back from Europe on a business trip and I just happened to see it on the in-flight movies. But the story behind that was Sound City was a famous studio in Van Nuys where Smells Like Teen Spirit was recorded. Mm-hmm. And he did this whole thing to tell the story of the studio that changed his life.
Yeah.
And I got off the plane and I said, I always wanted my studio. I'm in a position now where, I can do that. So I started on a mission.
It's interesting though, you're talking about that documentary. Tell me about the board.
Yeah.
You have a lot of history in this place.
Yeah, so we definitely have some history. So So the studio itself is built in an old bank building on Neville Island. We actually have the vault in the basement, and it's a reverb chamber, right? So what else would you do with a real vault, right? But early on when we first started, Jimmy Hoyston, Pittsburgh native, was out in LA for 30 plus years, six-time Grammy winner, had moved back to Pittsburgh, and he and I had connected. And we were talking about some of the things we could do, and he says, what we really need is a Neve console. And I said, well, of course. I mean, anybody who knows anything about engineering and recording, Neves are the most coveted. And I thought, okay, well, it's going to take us years to find this thing, right?
Yes.
Well, within literally weeks, we came across a beautiful vintage 8058 that Vintage King Audio in Detroit had actually refurbished. And it's got some crazy history to it, as we actually learned along the way. So the original owner of this board was George Harrison.
Oh, my.
So George and Pete Drake, who was a famous pedal steel player, had this in their studio in Nashville for years. And then they sold it to Scott Litt, who was the producer for REM, The Replacements.
Yep.
He did a bunch of work out in LA. He had it in LA for years, and then we put it in. So it's got some mojo, and it's just an amazing piece of gear. So I love the historical side of this too.
I remember visiting your space, and you were like, "Hey, this machine here, it's a I can't remember because it's been a while. Don't you have a tape machine?"
Yeah.
Tell me about the tape machine.
Okay, so
this is great.
So again, this it's sort of it just keeps accumulating, right? So we have the Neve for about a year.
Yeah.
I get a visit from Dave Hillis. So Dave, engineer, producer, spent years in Seattle. But his wife's originally from Pittsburgh. They had just moved back here. So they said, hey, I saw the Neve, want to come check out the studio? So we start talking. Well, Dave was the engineer out of London Bridge Studios that did Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, a lot of that 90s grunge that came out of Seattle. And he was looking for a place to work, and we had connected. And he's like, well, by the way, I've got this 2-inch 24 track that was originally in London Bridge that was used to record all of those records, and it's sitting in my garage.
Oh, wow.
I said, well,
I
got a better place than the garage for that.
Yes.
So, so now it's sitting there, and we've paired up the Neve with the Studer A800, which is just an amazing, it's the sort of Neve of tape machines.
So not only do you guys have the studio, but you kind of have like a record label thing going on too. Tell me about how that, like the business side, connect where, your business background and accounting, you say, oh, you know what, maybe we should have a label to kind of connect it to the studio. Like, what was
the concept behind the studio from the very beginning was more than a studio. I grew up in Pittsburgh. I've always believed that the talent in Pittsburgh is amazing, and that we've had some amazing runs in various genre over the history of the city, right? Doo-wop and jazz, and I always thought we didn't always get our sort of fair recognition sometimes as a city for the talent that we actually have.
Yeah.
And so I always thought, what if I could build a studio and I could create a community, right? So whether that's the label, we have a foundation that's actually in my son's memory that we run that's based on supporting youth education and music and that sort of thing. So the label, the foundation, the studio, we do a lot of camps and work with students in the studio. That the whole thing was meant to be a community builder, right?
Nice.
And it's funny because having Smokey in the building a few times for different events, subsequent to me coming up with this idea, I kind of laughed that it's almost like a little Pittsburgh version of Motown. Like if I just had all of those elements in one building, and everybody, at any given time, just walking the halls, you could run into people. And it started off as a building with just me sitting in the chair to just a whole team of people that are in the place at any point in time. So. What's
next for the studio? What do you guys have on the horizon?
So it's interesting. We've subsequently built another studio. Rob Diener, who ran Contagious Music downtown for years, now has V6 Music. Engineer, producer, composer, but he did a lot of post-production, ad TV, that sort of stuff. He's now in the studio with us. He has his own studio upstairs. We're in the process of building an Atmos room, which is fantastic. That's sort of next-gen surround.
Yeah.
And we actually have an adjacent property that we just got that still trying to figure out exactly what we're going to do with it, but it'll probably be event space. We'll use it again for for different events, some of the school student work that we're doing, and who knows if we need another studio yet? We've got expansion space.
So when you started your original like studio, like did you have any background in it, or was that how did you learn?
I mean, it goes back to when I was doing this, in the early days. I mean, truth be told, right? I was a business person who loved music and had always played with this, and I built the studio originally to be my own personal project studio. It was as time progressed and more people were attracted to it. I love sitting in the room with people who have done this all their lives and just watching and learning from them. And so to me, I retired from my corporate work back in 2018, and I'm doing this as a passion now.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I just love, being around talented people and, being a sponge and trying to figure out how they do it.
My days is recording, as I said earlier, it started with WRS Studios, but then later I've recorded in a couple of different recording studios, and I was always in amazement at how much it's changed. Because it used to be you would go in, you have your little area where you sit and have your coffee and you do your brainstorming, and then each one went into separate rooms. You know what I mean? You put the headphones on, and I never totally understood that. And then I see that it's going back. Some of them are going back to everything in one room, but they're separately mic'd. You know what I mean? Which to me, as a musician, makes a lot of sense because you get that feeling off.
You get the vibration.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know exactly. I can't wait to get on and see your place.
Well, and it's interesting because we built my place with that sort of in mind.
Okay.
Right? That as far as, yes, the modern style of recording, and we do a lot of it, right? A lot of the overdubs and kind of doing things one musician at a time. And there's a lot of programming and a lot of new stuff that you can do with the technology. But I too still really love the mojo that you get and the groove that you find when musicians and music, it's meant to be done together, right? It's meant to be an interactive process. I love jazz for that reason, right? And so the rooms are built to be able to track live.
Nice.
Right? We still do a lot of overdubs. We still do, everything is in Pro Tools these days. So even though we have the tape machine, we're not keeping things on tape, editing on tape, right? Because it's just so much more efficient to do it with the technology. But you can't beat the feeling that you get with musicians interacting with one another. So,
And that big thick tape,
Oh,
it's impressive, because when we first you were on those little, what was it, half-inch tape, right?
Now it's 2 inch. I joke when we're on the computer recording. I said, well, we still have plenty of tape, so we can do another tape.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, what type of artists have you been working with, or is there anyone in particular that you guys are?
It's we've got 5 or 6 engineer producers working out of the studio now, so everybody's got their own projects going on, and it's all genre. We've been doing a lot of jazz lately. My son is a jazz sax player. He's a music student up at Slippery Rock. So, there's a lot of jazz that we've kind of, gotten into with all of that. But, we still, classic rock stuff, funk. We're doing, a lot of singer-songwriter, a lot of pop.
Okay.
So it really, it's all genre. The label, we've got a mix. The label was never genre specific.
Okay.
So we have bands from classic sort of Stones-like bar rock, like the Borstal Boys. We've got.
Are they recording with you?
Oh yeah. So we do
good guys too.
All of their work was done. Actually, it's funny because the band started as a studio project with Rocky. He and I were doing his project, and as it evolved,
Turned into a band.
it turned into a band. And so they've been on the label from the beginning. Chris Jameson. So Chris, was a finalist on The Voice. For those who remember on season 7. So he was actually the first artist I had signed to the label. And then Slam Bandit Sam's another example of sort of funk rock, jazz influence. They've got a horn section as well. So it's a lot of different stuff. And then we've got folk Americana with Brad Malone, who's just a singer songwriter on his guitar.
What do you look for in an artist? When you're considering, hey, maybe I want to sign this person. even though you're across the genres, what's that special thing? And you're like, you know what, I want to work with them on that next level.
You know, I couldn't say that there's a checklist or criteria or anything. I mean, it's a small independent label. It's, you know, yes, it's a label, but, you know, we don't kind of blow it up to be much more than it really is. But a lot of it is just the personal relationships and connections that I make in a particular project.
Yeah.
It just sort of happens organically, and we kind of know when we know.
Yeah.
Right?
Like
So you're looking for an old soul man, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then it's funny too, because a lot of it's capacity. I mean, I'm a one person, you know, running a little label in Pittsburgh here.
Yeah.
So we're just having fun with it.
That's
Just
nice.
having fun with
That's
it.
awesome.
So.
Cool.
Most of our business, that's how everything did start. You know, just about every band I know that paid their dues and are still performing today, it started as fun.
Sure.
And I've always said this, if it's not fun, I get out.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, there's something about being in a studio that still gives you this feeling, you feel like you're better than you are. Because you're doing stuff that you never did before, you know what I mean? And it's coming out, you know, your juices are flowing, and it's like...
And that's the right way. I mean, to me, the studio, and this is what drew me to doing that, and actually what drew me to the other side of the glass, right? From a musician to being an engineer, was there something magical about being in the studio. And I would say it's like my little Vegas, right? Because, you know, we close the doors, there's no clocks, there's no windows.
Yes.
You lose track of time, and if you're
sure
doing
do.
it right, you're creating an environment where people are really comfortable and it's creative and something special happens there, right?
I love it. Awesome.
I'm dear friends and perform a lot with a gentleman who was in the studio all his life, Donnie Garvin.
Mm-hmm.
And Donnie, you know, Donnie still has that same, that I want to say electricity. And he's almost like the Spock or one of those guys on Star Trek, right? You know, he sits behind that board and he's like, "This is my domain."
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And I can see that. We never really met, but I can see that same fire. You know what I mean? That's a cool thing.
It's definitely a passion. So I have to admit this. You know, this at times is a little bit more fun than accounting.
Yeah.
Nothing against the accounting.
Yeah, I
I did
can
it for
see
a long
that.
time, but yeah, it's just a blast. It really is.
From a producer engineer perspective, what are some of the things that you do? I know everyone will be a little different, but what are certain tactics that you maybe use to pull the best out of the people? You know, like, okay, I can see she's a little nervous. How do I, you know what, let's do another take. Like, what are those things like on the human connection level that you're able to pull the best out of the artist?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think everybody has their own style and their own techniques. I mean, I personally I work really hard to make sure the artist is just comfortable, right? That it's not intimidating, that they have all the time that they need, that they, you know, the quicker that I can get them to just relax and enjoy the process, not think about what they're doing, but just, you know, be natural and feel it. So a lot of it is just creating an environment, whether it's the space, the lighting, the way I'm handling the conversations, to make sure that they're comfortable in what they're doing, so that hopefully we can get the best performance out of them.
Yeah.
Now, everybody's different. I mean, you know, old days, I mean, there were, you know, horror stories of producers, you know, the screaming at each other and do it again and do it again and do it again. I mean, so there's a lot of different ways to get the most out of somebody, and we all have to find what works for us.
Right.
But, you know, for me, it's just always been more of a, let's keep it low key, let's relax, let's just enjoy ourselves and have some fun.
I love that.
And, you know, we're not working in the days of, you know, big label, major budget, lots of money being spent. I mean, you know, these are important to the individuals, and they're spending, you know, money on, you know, on their own to do these things, but you need to make them comfortable.
Yeah.
And some of the best stories I have from my fellow musicians are downtimes at studios.
Yeah.
You know, you should run a tape once they walk in the door and then sell it back to them and say, "Here was your fun." It's amazing, you know, when you think about some of the creative things that you come up with your other folks, and most of the time it was a mistake. You know, it's like, and that's what's really cool about being in the studio too.
And it's funny you say that, because, you know, joking about, you know, having tape versus being on the computer now. Because you can keep everything.
Yeah, that's right.
So a lot of times they'll be like, "Well, we're just going to run through this real quick, and I'll hit the button and just let it
tell
run."
them,
And a lot of times, one of the tricks, right, is I'm going to give away my tricks, so now people are
No.
We'll edit it out.
But, a lot of times they'll say, okay, we got what we need, so why don't we just do another one,
For
or
fun.
this doesn't
Yeah.
count, or just really,
Yeah.
and of course you're keeping everything
Yeah.
because that's when
That's when it
lightning
comes
in a
out.
bottle happens,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. I think we should go out and check out the studio sometime.
I think we should lay something down.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Let's
that'd be
do
great.
it.
You know what
Let's
I
just
mean?
make a date. Yeah.
And we do a segment where we talk about something old, something new, something treasured. And shall we start?
Yeah.
I always do the first one because you do it.
All right, something
Okay.
old, and all it is like whatever comes to mind.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, something old would have to be the Neve.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I was
There it
thinking.
Neve Day, I like
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
And something new.
Something new. I mean, that's the technology that we're using today.
Or your new tape machine. No, I'm
It's-
teasing.
the new old tape machine, right? Yeah. So I think it's all the new technology,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's marrying those two. So.
Something treasured.
Something treasured. The musicians of Pittsburgh.
I like that.
Thank you about that.
Yeah, thank you.
And something true.
Something true. I think the one thing that still holds true is musicians playing music together will always be the best type of performance.
Such a bond right there.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, when you don't know a person until you've worked with them musically.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, bang, you find out everything. You know,
Yeah.
it's,
Good and bad.
Yeah, that's true. That is
Yeah.
true. Secrets come to the surface,
Yeah.
but in a good way, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Bob, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
It's
this was
working
great.
with you guys.
and we do have to get together. I think it's going to be fun.
We're going to set it up.
All
Sounds
right.
great. Thank you, and we'll be right back at you with some clips.
Yeah.
We can do some
we'll
What are we
see.
doing?
Welcome to Byron's Bodega, everybody. I know they're like, what the hell are you showing me? This is an igloo cooler that I got from my son for Christmas. It's Iron Maiden, and I'm old school for modern brewing. And one, I just love memorabilia and cool stuff. I absolutely love Iron Maiden. And my son got me this because I can take it to gigs. So instead of me being like, oh, I gotta take some, go buy beer, or I can take my waters, or I can take it to the gym. I take it to work, and now I walk into work and I got my little lunch pail. I love lunch boxes back in the day because, like, if your mom made you lunch, you were kind of like surprised, like, did she make me something good or bad? This is my way of having control over that, but still staying rock and roll in the process.
Yeah, so we got it directly from Vintage King, who we knew purchased it directly from Scott Litt. But at the time I got it, Vintage King didn't necessarily know any of the history prior to Scott. So after we got it, we spent a little bit of time doing some research, and we actually got back to Scott, who's the one who told us, oh, by the way, I purchased it directly from George Harrison and Pete Drake, who had it in their studio in Nashville. So I know that far back. Now, it's a 1977. We know Scott picked it up in the mid-'80s at some point.
Okay.
So it's just a question of how long did George and Pete have it before. They wouldn't have had it long to begin with before selling it to Scott.
Wow.
So yeah, it's got.
It's great
got so
history.
much of it.
It's-
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
A lot of music's been recorded on this board.
Absolutely, absolutely.